My name is Landon. I'm 26 years old, and like a lot of young adults, I decided to move back in with my parents to save money. The plan seemed pretty solid at first. Rents in my city were insane, and it made no sense to spend a fortune on rent when I could stay at my parents' house and save up for a future house of my own. At first, everything was going great. I paid a fair rent, helped around the house, and still managed to save a good chunk of change for my eventual down payment. My mom, Claire, even started calling me responsible, which made me feel good. I knew I was doing the right thing, and things were fairly chill. I worked my 9 to 5, came home, did my part around the house, and overall, everything was going smoothly. Nothing out of the ordinary. But then everything changed when my sister, Olivia, and her boyfriend, Aiden, moved in. Olivia, who's 22, had dropped out of college and couldn't hold down a job for more than 3 weeks. So naturally, her moving back home wasn't all that surprising. But what really threw me for a loop was Aiden. This guy was the definition of a freeloader. He didn't work, had no plans of working, and spent his days lounging on the couch, eating the food I was paying for while mindlessly scrolling through his phone. It was like he thought he could just hang around and live off others indefinitely, and my parents, for some bizarre reason, treated him like family. Meanwhile, I, who was out working my tail off, was being looked at like I was the one who wasn't pulling my weight. At first, I tried to keep the peace. Olivia is my sister, after all, and I didn't want to stir up trouble. I thought, hey, they're young, they'll get tired of this and move out soon enough. But that didn't happen. If anything, Olivia became more demanding, and Aiden just dug in deeper. It felt like the house was falling apart at the seams. Olivia was starting to act more and more like a spoiled teenager, expecting my parents to take care of everything for her. Aiden was doing absolutely nothing, yet my parents treated him like a part of the family, while I was stuck doing all the responsible adult stuff. Things took a turn when my parents asked me to contribute more to the household. Initially, I figured it would be a small increase, maybe an extra $50 a month, but when they dropped the bomb, I was floored. They wanted to double my rent. I'd been paying a fair amount, but now they were asking for almost double. Naturally, I asked why. My dad, Michael, gave me the most ridiculous explanation. He said the bills for food and utilities had gone up with Olivia and Aiden living there, and it was only fair that I pitched in more since I was doing well. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I worked full-time, paid all my bills, and still helped out around the house, while my sister and her boyfriend, who did nothing all day, were living off of me. And now I was supposed to pay extra to cover their lack of contribution? I immediately told them no. I wasn't going to pay more just to support Olivia and Aiden's lifestyle. That's when my mom jumped in, saying, "They're going through a rough time, Landon. Not everyone has it as easy as you." Easy? I worked 50 hours a week, busted my ass just to make ends meet, and they were calling me lazy? That did it for me. My mom, for some reason, was acting like it was my job to keep everything afloat while Olivia and Aiden just coasted along. The situation only got worse from there. My parents started leaving passive-aggressive notes on my door about household chores and food I was supposed to buy. Olivia, being the brat she was, started making snide comments about how nice it must be to only worry about myself. The worst part? My parents were backing her up. It felt like I was the one being treated like the problem, while Olivia, who didn't contribute anything, was getting a free pass. Things really came to a head one Sunday at dinner. Normally we had a family dinner, but this time I couldn't keep quiet anymore. I finally said, maybe Olivia and Aiden should start contributing around here, like I do. The room went dead silent. Olivia turned bright red, and Aiden had the nerve to smirk at me like he was above it all. Then Olivia slammed her fork on the table and screamed, "You're such a Landon! Aiden and I are trying to figure things out, and all you do is sit here judging us." That was the tipping point. I stared her down and said, "Oh, you mean trying to figure things out by lying on the couch all day while I bust my ass at work?" My dad jumped in, telling me to watch my tone. My mom looked like she was about to cry. And Aiden, being the charming guy he is, muttered under his breath, "Someone's jealous." That was the last straw. I pushed my chair back, stood up, and said, "You know what? I'm done. If you want me to pay for Olivia and Aiden's lifestyle, forget it. I'm out of here." My parents tried to calm me down, but I wasn't listening. I grabbed a bag with my essentials and called my best friend, Logan. He'd been telling me for months to move in with him, and I finally took him up on it. When I went downstairs with my bag, my mom was sobbing, begging me not to go. Olivia sat there looking pleased with herself, whispering something to Aiden as if it were all some big joke. My dad just stood there, arms crossed, looking at me like I'd betrayed him. I said, "I'll come back for the rest of my stuff tomorrow," and walked out the door. Logan picked me up, and honestly, it felt like the weight of the world had been lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in months, I felt free. I didn't have to walk on eggshells around Olivia and Aiden anymore. It was just me, and I was finally taking control of my own life. But of course, that didn't last long. The next morning, my phone started buzzing off the hook. My mom flooded my inbox with text messages and voicemail after voicemail, pleading for me to come back. "Landon, please come home. We need to talk. Olivia and Aiden will change. We need you here." I ignored them at first, but the messages kept coming. I could tell my mom was desperate. Logan said I did the right thing. He reassured me over and over, but the guilt started creeping in. It was hard to shake the feeling that I had let my family down, even though I knew deep down that I'd made the right decision. I couldn't be their safety net anymore. I had to look out for myself for a change. The morning after I left, I tried to clear my head. I figured the worst was over. I had packed my things, I'd told my parents where I stood, and now I was living with Logan. At least I told myself I could breathe again. The weight that had been on my shoulders for months, no, for years, was finally lifted. But of course, things weren't as simple as I'd hoped. My phone started ringing before I'd even had my morning coffee. It was my mom. I didn't pick up at first. I was still processing everything, still feeling the bitterness bubbling up from the night before. After all, how had it gotten this bad? How had I been put in a position where I had to leave my own family home just to be treated with respect? My mom left a voicemail, but I didn't listen to it right away. I knew it would be full of guilt trips and manipulation. I wasn't ready to hear it. A few hours later, the texts started flooding in. The first one was from my mom. "Landon, please come back home. We can talk. Olivia and Aiden will change, I promise. We really need you here." The next text came soon after. "We're all just trying to make it work. This isn't like you. Don't leave us like this." I could feel the guilt creeping in as I stared at the screen. Every word felt like a stab in my chest. But as much as it hurt to ignore her, I had to keep my distance. I knew this wasn't going to be easy. They weren't going to let me go that easily. I wasn't just a part of their house, I was the one holding everything together. Or at least I had been. I wasn't the only one they relied on, but I was the one who didn't ask for anything in return. Olivia and Aiden had always been the ones getting the special treatment, and I had been the one trying to make everything work. But now, I was the one who had finally had enough. Logan could tell something was off. He knew the story, of course. He'd heard me vent about my family for months, and he'd been the one to encourage me to leave. But even he couldn't fully understand the emotional turmoil I was going through. He'd been my rock throughout this whole ordeal, but now, I was stuck with a cloud of guilt hanging over me. Every time I picked up my phone and saw my mom's name on the screen, I felt the tug. I felt like maybe I was being too harsh, but deep down, I knew I wasn't. A couple of days went by and the calls and texts didn't stop. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I needed time. Time to think, time to process, time to figure out what I wanted for my life moving forward. I wasn't going to be a safety net for everyone else anymore. I wasn't going to sacrifice my own future just to make sure everyone else was comfortable. And yet, when my phone buzzed again one afternoon, I hesitated. This time, it wasn't from my mom. It was from my dad. His message was brief. "Landon, please call me. We need to talk. You're a part of this family. Don't shut us out." My heart sank. I wasn't ready to talk. Not yet. But something in his message made me feel like I should at least hear him out. I didn't want to completely cut them off. They were still my parents, after all. But every time I thought about going back, I remembered how I'd been treated, how they had put Olivia and Aiden above me, how they had acted as if I owed them. It didn't sit right with me. The next morning, Logan and I were hanging out at his place when I got a call from my mom. She was sobbing on the other end of the line. "Landon, please, you have to come back. Olivia and Aiden, they're in so much trouble. They need you." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to go back, wanted to fix everything, but another part of me screamed that I shouldn't. I had been the one holding everything together for so long, and the second I stopped, the whole house fell apart. But why should it be my responsibility to fix it? I stayed silent, just listening to her cry. "I don't know what to do without you, Landon," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please come back. I don't know how we're going to make it without you here." It was like a slap to the face. She'd never said anything like that before. She was right, of course. They didn't know how to make it without me. But why did that feel so wrong? Why did I feel like I was being guilted into something I wasn't ready for? I loved my family, but I couldn't keep doing this. "I'll think about it, Mom," I said, my voice flat, "but I need some space right now." I hung up the phone and sat back against the couch, my head spinning. Logan, sensing my frustration, didn't push. He just gave me a nod as if saying, "I get it." But then, a few hours later, I got news that completely changed everything. I was scrolling through my phone when I saw an article pop up. Local couple arrested for shoplifting. Beneath the headline, there was a blurry photo of Olivia and Aiden. I couldn't believe it. It was them. I felt a knot twist in my stomach. I stared at the article, reading over it several times to make sure I wasn't seeing things. Olivia and Aiden had been caught stealing from a grocery store. My first reaction was shock, followed by a wave of disbelief. What the hell was going on? I immediately sent a message to Logan asking him if he had seen the news. He replied quickly, confirming that he had. "Your parents must be losing their minds right now," he texted me. I didn't know how to process it. Olivia, my baby sister, was involved in a crime. Aiden, the guy I'd been warning my parents about for months, had dragged her down with him. I felt a strange mixture of anger and sadness. Not long after, I got a text from Emma, a friend from high school who I hadn't heard from in a while. "Hey, I just heard something crazy about Olivia. You good?" I didn't know how to respond to her. I was barely holding it together, and now, this? Olivia, the same girl who had been my responsibility for so long, was out there getting arrested. My mind was racing, and I didn't know what to do with the flood of emotions I was feeling. Logan noticed my silence and asked if I was okay. "I don't know," I said quietly. "It's like I've been saying this whole time. Olivia and Aiden, neither of them are willing to help themselves. I can't keep fixing their problems." I wasn't wrong, but it didn't feel like victory. It didn't feel like I had won. I felt like I was watching my family spiral, and no matter what I did, I couldn't pull them out. That night, I got another text. It was from my dad. "We need you here, Landon. Olivia's in trouble. Please come home. We don't know what to do." The next few days were a blur of uncertainty. The news of Olivia and Aiden's arrest hit me like a ton of bricks. My sister, the same person who had been coddled and enabled for so long, was now involved in something serious. My parents were, understandably, a mess. My dad had sent me a text that evening, and I still hadn't responded. It didn't feel like the right time to go back, not when the air was thick with blame and resentment. Yet I couldn't help but feel a nagging sense of duty deep down. They were my family, and despite everything, they needed me. The phone kept buzzing with messages from my parents, especially my mom. The desperation in her texts was clear. She was pleading with me to come home. The guilt continued to build, squeezing tighter every time my phone rang with their names on the screen. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was abandoning them, but at the same time, I knew going back meant stepping back into the same unhealthy cycle I had just left. Logan could see I was struggling. He had been my rock through all of this, always ready with a laugh or a shoulder to lean on. But even he knew I wasn't okay. He tried to make light of the situation, joking that at least I wasn't stuck with Olivia and Aiden's drama anymore. "You're in the land of the sane now," he'd say, trying to make me smile. But the smile didn't come. I was too torn between the anger I felt toward my family and the part of me that still loved them. One afternoon, after a long day of work, I got a message from my dad that made my stomach drop. It was short and direct. "Landon, we need to talk. Olivia's gone." I stared at the text for a while, trying to process what it meant. Gone? What did that mean? Was she at a friend's place? Was she just avoiding us after the arrest? I'd been hoping for some sign that Olivia was finally ready to take responsibility for her actions, but this felt like the last straw. I couldn't sit by any longer. My sister was out there, in trouble again, and I was the one she turned to, whether she realized it or not. I had to go back. Logan didn't try to stop me when I told him I was going back to my parents' house. "You know what you're doing, man," he said, looking at me with a mix of concern and understanding. He knew I had to figure this out on my own. "Just don't get caught up in the same mess again, all right?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I believed myself. Would going back mean picking up the pieces of my family's brokenness again? Or would it mean I finally stood my ground and made them see what they'd put me through? The thought of returning to that house made me uneasy, but I couldn't just walk away from Olivia, not with everything she'd been through. When I arrived at my parents' house, everything felt off. The air was thick with tension. My mom was standing at the door when I pulled up, her eyes swollen from crying, her face pale. My dad, usually the strong, silent type, looked drained. He didn't say anything as I walked in, just gestured for me to sit. Olivia wasn't there. "Where's Olivia?" I asked, my voice shaky with the worry that had been building all afternoon. My dad glanced at my mom before answering. "She's gone, Landon. She left last night, took off with Aiden." My mom immediately burst into tears, grabbing my arm as though I was her only lifeline. "I don't know what to do, Landon. She left us a note, said she had to live her life. She's with Aiden, and we don't know where she's gone." I was stunned. "A note? What do you mean, a note?" "Yeah," my dad chimed in, his voice tight with frustration. "A damn note. She said she needed to live her life, that she was sorry, but she couldn't stay here anymore. She didn't even say where she was going." I felt sick. This wasn't the sister I knew. This wasn't the girl who used to look up to me, the one who was too stubborn to listen to anyone but herself. Now she was running off with the one person who had done nothing but manipulate her. Aiden was toxic, and Olivia, for whatever reason, couldn't see it. As my mom cried into my shoulder, I had a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. Olivia had always been impulsive, but this felt different. It felt like she had completely given up. Maybe Aiden had convinced her that he was the only person who understood her. Maybe she thought she had nothing left here, nothing left with me, nothing left with our parents. But I couldn't just let her throw everything away. "Did she leave anything else?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. My dad handed me the note, his hands shaking as he did. It was short, barely a few lines. "I'm sorry. I need to live my life. I'm going to be with Aiden. Don't try to find me. Love, Olivia." I read it twice, trying to process the words. I couldn't believe what I was reading. Aiden was still the center of her world, and now she was running away with him like it was the only option left. I set the note down, my mind racing. What was I supposed to do now? My parents were clearly beside themselves, but I couldn't fix Olivia's life. I couldn't make her change. She had to do that herself. But I knew deep down that she wasn't going to get any better without some kind of intervention. "I'll find her," I said, the words leaving my mouth before I even realized what I was saying. It wasn't a question, it was a decision. I wasn't going to let my sister slip away without at least trying to help. My mom stopped crying long enough to look at me, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You will? Landon, please, bring her home. She needs you. We all need you." I swallowed hard, trying to ignore the tightness in my chest. "I'll do my best, Mom. But this time I'm not going to be her safety net. She has to face her choices." I turned toward the door, knowing that if I didn't go after Olivia now, I might never see her again. I didn't know what I was walking into. I didn't know if she would even listen to me. But I couldn't let her destroy herself, especially not for Aiden. As I stepped out into the night, a cold breeze hit my face. I felt a sense of purpose settle over me, mixed with the fear of what I was about to do. I didn't know if Olivia would listen, but I had to try. Logan had warned me not to get sucked back into the chaos. But this wasn't about that. This was about my sister, my family. And no matter how messy things had gotten, I couldn't turn my back on them completely. I was going after Olivia, and I wouldn't stop until I found her. The road to finding Olivia felt like a blur. After I left my parents' house that night, everything seemed to move in fast forward. My mind was racing, but I couldn't afford to slow down. Olivia was out there somewhere with Aiden, and I had to bring her back, whether she wanted it or not. Every minute that passed, every second I wasted, only made me more anxious. The guilt and the anger were at war in my head. I was mad at her for making such a reckless decision, for running off with someone who didn't give a damn about her. But I still loved her. She was my little sister. I couldn't abandon her, even if she had made her bed and was now lying in it. I drove around for hours, checking all the places I knew she might be. The parks she used to go to, the cheap motels that dotted the outskirts of town, even the old cafe she and I used to hang out at when we were younger. But there was no sign of her. By the time I pulled up to the rundown motel on the edge of town, I was exhausted. The place looked like it hadn't been updated in years, with neon signs flickering weakly in the cold night air. My stomach churned, a feeling of dread sinking deeper with each step. I had this gut feeling that this was where Olivia was hiding out, though part of me hated to admit it. As I parked my car, I noticed a woman sitting on the curb near the entrance, a duffel bag beside her, looking completely out of place. My heart skipped when I saw her face. It was Olivia. She looked like a shell of herself, pale, disheveled, and staring off into the distance as if she were lost in thought. I could barely recognize her. I parked the car quickly, my hands shaking as I opened the door. I took a deep breath, hoping I didn't seem too out of control, but I could feel the panic rising inside me. My heart raced as I walked over to her, every step heavier than the last. When Olivia saw me, she didn't jump up in shock or run. She didn't say a word. She just looked at me, her eyes vacant, as if she didn't know who I was anymore. "Olivia," I said, my voice cracking. "What are you doing here? This isn't you." She didn't respond immediately, just continued to stare at the ground. I felt the anger surge through me again, but I swallowed it down. I had to stay calm. I needed to get through to her. "Olivia," I said, kneeling down to her level, trying to make myself smaller, less intimidating. "You can't stay here. This isn't the life you want. Aiden is not the answer." At that, she finally looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She shook her head slowly. "You don't get it, Landon. He's the only one who cares about me. He's the only one who's ever really cared." I felt my blood boil. What about Mom and Dad? What about me? We've always been here for you, Olivia. This isn't love. He's using you, and you're letting him. She looked away, tears welling up in her eyes. "You don't understand, Landon. You have your life together. You've got everything figured out. But I'm nothing. I have nothing. And Aiden, he says he loves me. That's more than I've ever had." My chest tightened, and I could feel the frustration bubbling over. "Olivia, that's not love. He's manipulating you. He's dragging you down with him, and you're letting it happen. You're worth so much more than this. Don't you see that?" She stood up suddenly, grabbing the duffel bag and slinging it over her shoulder. "You don't know anything, Landon. You never did." My heart sank. "Olivia, please don't do this. Don't let him control you." She shook her head, her expression hardening. "I'm not you, Landon. I don't want your life. I don't want your expectations. I'm trying to figure things out on my own." Before I could say anything else, she turned and started walking towards the motel office. I stood there, frozen for a moment, my mind racing. How could she be so blind? How could she throw everything away for someone like Aiden? I had always tried to protect her, tried to guide her, but it felt like I was losing her more and more every day. I stood there for a few moments, unsure of what to do. My gut told me to walk away, that there was nothing more I could say. But another part of me, the part that still saw my little sister as the girl I used to protect, told me to keep pushing. I couldn't give up on her, not now, not ever. Just as I was about to turn and leave, I heard her voice behind me. "I don't know what to do anymore, Landon," she said quietly. "I'm scared. I thought this would make everything better, but it's only worse. I don't know where to go from here. I turned around to face her, my anger suddenly turning to compassion. You don't have to do this alone, Olivia. You never have to do this alone. We're your family. We love you. Please come home. She hesitated for a long moment, her eyes flickering with doubt. I could see the cracks in her armor, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she seemed to be listening. I don't know if I can just go back, she whispered. Everything's a mess. I don't want to disappoint Mom and Dad again. You won't disappoint them, I said firmly, stepping toward her. They just want you to be happy and healthy. This isn't the way. You need to come back home, Olivia. We can fix this together. You don't have to keep running. Olivia looked at me for a long time, her body tense as if she was fighting herself. Finally, she dropped the duffel bag at her feet and collapsed into my arms. For the first time in what felt like forever, she was letting me in. I'm sorry, Landon. I don't know what happened to me. I felt so lost. I hugged her tightly, holding her in that moment. It's okay, Liv. We'll figure it out. Together. We sat there for a while, in the cold night air, just holding each other. It felt like we had been through hell and back, but I knew we were on the other side now. Maybe Olivia wasn't fully healed yet, but she was ready to take the first step toward getting there, and that was all I could ask for. Eventually, we made our way back to the car. Olivia didn't say much, but I could tell she was thinking about what had happened, and maybe, just maybe, she was starting to see that Aiden wasn't the answer. We had a long road ahead of us, but I was willing to walk it with her. As we drove back to my parents' house, I could feel the weight lifting, if only just a little. Olivia was coming back, and so was I.